Hi, my name's Adeline, and if you've ever been called useless by the people who raised you, if you've ever stood in a room you helped build while your own father planned to fire you right in front of your sister, then maybe you'll understand what it felt like to open an email meant for someone else and realize your whole family had already written you out of their future. But what they didn't know was that my grandfather had written me into something far more permanent. And when I finally sat at the table they tried to erase me from, I didn't speak first. I spoke last. I was standing just outside the spotlight, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to pretend I didn't mind the shadows. That's what you do when you're the quiet daughter. You pretend. You play along. You stay useful. Until someone decides even that isn't enough. It was the first Tuesday of the month. Town Hall Day. The kind where every department squeezed into the executive boardroom at our family's tech firm. People-filled chairs leaned against the back wall, balanced coffee cups on their knees. I'd spent the whole weekend finalizing the quarterly update. Clean charts. Simple language, clear metrics, not flashy. Just correct. My part was scheduled right after Dad's remarks. He stood at the front in his usual blazer that hadn't changed in style since 2002, rattling off top-line figures like they were gospel. Callista, my older sister, nodded encouragingly from the coffee bar like some sort of corporate cheerleader. I waited quietly at stage left. Then he paused mid-sentence, squinting down the room toward me. "Adeline," he called out with a smile that curled more than it warmed. "You're up next, right?" I stepped forward and nodded, laptop already open. "Yes, I have." But he raised a hand and said, chuckling, "Let's hope this isn't another one of your PowerPoint specials. She's not exactly a numbers girl, folks, but she prints them out real well." It landed like glass shattering across linoleum. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. My mouth opened, but no sound came. I scanned the room for a familiar eye, some flicker of protest. Instead, I caught Callista biting into a biscotti and smirking like she'd just won bingo. That was the thing about silence. It didn't scream. It just swallowed. I backed away without finishing my thought. Morris Wren. My father moved on without missing a beat. The meeting continued. I did not. Walking back to my office, I could feel it, the absence of eye contact, the stiff smiles. A few staffers gave the awkward half-nod reserved for car crashes and open-casket funerals. My heels felt heavier than usual against the hallway floor. Inside my office, I closed the door gently and sat at my desk. I didn't cry. I never do at work. Not since that one time back in '09, when an intern saw me tear up after a lost pitch and told someone I was fragile. Word travels fast when you're a woman in a leadership role people never agreed you earned. I opened my laptop. There, it was an unread email forwarded from my mother's account. It must have slipped past her filters. The subject line read, "Transition Plan Reassigning Adeline's Duties." My stomach didn't drop. It just went still. The message was part of a thread sent from my mother to my father, then to Callista. Casual, efficient, like organizing catering for an event. Best to let her go quietly, maybe say it's time for her to pursue new growth. She'll cry for a week and then move on. We should get ahead of it before she starts asking questions. Callista replied, "No need for noise." And then from my mother agreed. A smile emoji. I stared at it for minutes, maybe longer. That tiny yellow face did more damage than any curse word ever could. It was the punctuation on a plan to erase me. The funny part, I hadn't even noticed I was being edged out. That's how slow betrayal moves, until it doesn't. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling tiles. Beige, speckled, boring. Like nothing had changed, even though everything had. They hadn't sent that email to me by accident. Not really. It was a reveal. A conclusion they assumed I wouldn't challenge. I wasn't a fighter in their eyes, just someone who followed instructions, handed out printed slides, worked weekends without complaint. I clicked the email closed. Then I sat still for what felt like forever. I thought about the job offers I'd turned down from other companies. The Christmas Eves I spent in the office while Callista was in Aspen. The time I rewrote a whole proposal over Thanksgiving dinner because my dad forgot his talking points. I remembered the look on my mother's face every time I spoke at a meeting, like she wished I'd hurry up and sit down. And now this. They were firing me, in secret, quietly, because they didn't think I'd make a scene. Because they didn't think I was anything more than convenient. But they forgot something crucial. I reached over to the bookshelf beside my desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Old, polished, engraved with initials in gold. It used to sit on my grandfather's desk before he passed. Inside was a letter I hadn't opened in 5 years. It wasn't the right time back then, but maybe it was now. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my palm. And I whispered not to anyone else, but just to myself, soft, steady, and suddenly certain. The next morning, I got dressed slower than usual. There was no meeting invite on my calendar, at least not one with my name on it. Still, I showed up. Not out of defiance, not yet, just habit. After 10 years, you don't just stop showing up because someone decided you don't belong anymore. At least, not overnight. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, the air was already humming with the low murmur of conversation. I could hear voices from the conference room. Callista's laugh, the clink of coffee cups, someone pulling out a chair. I headed toward the glass door, reaching for the handle. Locked. Behind me, the receptionist. Grace, a sweet girl who once baked me banana bread for my birthday, rushed toward me, heels clicking fast. "Oh, Ms. Odalin, I'm so sorry, I meant to catch you earlier." I turned slowly, hand still, on the metal handle. "What's going on?" She gave me a tight, nervous smile. "It's just, the leadership strategy session this week is limited to executive alignment only. Isn't that what I'm here for?" Her face flushed. I think they meant senior alignment like, direct leads?" I didn't move. I could see them through the glass. My father at the head of the table. Callista beside him, flipping through a slide deck I created. Beside her, Vivian, my mother. Not a company employee, just, they're like always wearing judgment like perfume. Grace shifted awkwardly. "There wasn't a name tag for you this time." It's fine," I said quietly. I stepped aside, standing against the wall like an intern hoping for a hallway nod. From inside the room, someone made a joke. Laughter followed. I caught Callista's voice again, rising above the rest, smooth, performative, the kind that plays well on stage. There was no chair for me in that room. There hadn't been for a long time. I just didn't see it until the door was locked. By 6:30 that evening, I found myself pulling into the circular driveway of my parents' house in Cherry Hills. The lawn was manicured, the porch lights warm, and inviting, the kind of house you imagine happy families living in, the kind that hides secrets behind carefully chosen landscaping. Inside, the smell of roast chicken filled the air. My mother greeted me with a distracted kiss on the cheek, already mid-sentence about a wine she discovered in Sonoma. Callista was there too, of course, glowing in her soft beige cashmere and gold jewelry. She held a glass of wine like she was born with it. "Oh, you're here," she said. Not a greeting, an observation. Just in time, my father added, setting down a bottle of Cabernet. We were about to toast Callista's award. I froze. Award? Callista smiled, modest but expectant. "PR Colorado honored me this week. Strategic excellence in brand stewardship." I forced a smile. "Congrats." Vivian clapped softly, already raising her glass. "We always knew Callista had the presence. You've always been thoughtful. More of a thinker, a background kind of girl." I don't remember sipping the wine, just holding it, feeling the stem against my fingers like a feather to reality. Dinner was served on bone china. My mother wore pearls. My father told stories about when the company was just an idea, and Callista laughed at all the right moments. Midway through dessert, Maurice turned to her and said, "Oh, and take the company card with you for that speaking trip. We'll cover everything." No one looked at me. After the last fork hit the plate, my mother stood and gathered a few empty glasses. Then she looked at me and said, "Odalyn, could you help clear the rest?" I nodded. Of course I did. That's what background girls do. As I carried dishes into the kitchen, I passed the living room. On the mantel was a framed photo of the three of us. Me, Callista, and my parents. From a trip to Seattle. Except, it wasn't the original photo. I could tell. In the version I remembered, I was in the middle. In this one, Callista was centered. I had been shifted to the side. The edit was subtle, but deliberate. I excused myself and made my way to the guest bathroom, flicking on the light and closing the door behind me. I stood there for a long time. The mirror was a little too clean. The lighting a little too perfect. My reflection looked like someone I didn't know how to defend anymore. And then I saw it, still hanging around my neck. My company badge. It dangled from its lanyard like a forgotten accessory. A token of who I used to be. I reached up and unclipped it. For a moment, I stared at my own photo, the one printed years ago, when I still believed being useful was enough. My name underneath in all caps. Odalyn Wren, Director of Operations. I placed it on the bathroom counter. They weren't waiting to fire me. They already had. They were replacing me in stages, cutting me out of the room, then the meetings, then the photos, and soon even the nameplate on my door. I gripped the edge of the sink and steadied my breath. They were grooming her. Callista. She was the face, the voice, the golden one. And I had been erased before I knew I was vanishing. But Grandpa knew this was coming. He saw the writing long before I did, and he left me a way through. The next morning, I drove west away from downtown traffic and out past the line where Denver gives way to older roads and older stories. The estate sat quiet on the edge of a ridge like it always had. Stoic, unbothered, a place where time kept to itself. I parked beside the rosebush Grandpa once trimmed every Sunday, then walked up the steps slowly, almost afraid the place wouldn't remember me. But the key still fit. Inside, the air held a faint mix of dust and pipe smoke. I could almost hear him shifting in his chair, murmuring about markets and mid-century morals. I crossed the foyer, passing the grandfather clock that hadn't worked since he died, and turned left into the study no one visited anymore. Nothing had moved. The same books lined the wall-to-wall shelves, their faded spines watching me silently. His desk, walnut solid, scarred with use, waited beneath the tall window. I circled behind it, crouched, and reached behind the lower right frame on the wall. Raising Steers in the Dust Bowl, 1956, and pressed the small brass latch he showed me when I was 12, it clicked open. The drawer glided out with a quiet groan, revealing a small box wrapped in gray linen. I unwrapped it slowly and found two things. First, an envelope yellowed slightly at the edges. In his firm, blocky handwriting, "For Odalyn. Open after your 30th birthday, not before." Second, a thick black binder stamped Family Voting Trust. Restricted disclosure. I stared at both for a long while. My hands shook as I reached for the letter. This wasn't a goodbye, not some sentimental keepsake. It was a message meant for this exact moment. I sat down at the desk, slid my finger under the flap, and unfolded the letter inside. It was written in ink, no printed formality, just Grandpa's handwriting, deliberate and sharp. Odalyn, if you're reading this, it means you're 30. And that means you're ready. I didn't give you this earlier because readiness isn't about age. It's about clarity. And clarity only comes after betrayal. I blinked hard, then read on. I watched what they did to your mother when she asked questions. I watched how silence became survival. I also knew they'd come for you eventually when you got too smart, too steady, too indispensable. That's why I waited. That's why I didn't tell them what I set in motion. You hold 70% of the company's voting control and trust activated automatically on your 30th birthday. The paperwork is enclosed, legal binding, irreversible. My breath stalled. I reread that sentence 4 times. You're not invisible, Odalin. You are the storm's eye. Stay calm. Be quiet. Let them think you're still the breeze. I dropped the letter onto the desk, my fingers numb. It wasn't just protection. It was preparation. He'd seen the shape of this before I had a name for it. The lockouts, the whispers, the credits handed to someone else. And he gave me the antidote. It hit me like a slow, rising tide. No yelling, no fist pounding, just heat beneath the surface of my skin, the kind that melts stone from the inside out. I closed the binder, gently tucking the letter inside the front sleeve. My hand hovered over the badge on my chest. Then I stood. The sun outside had dropped low by then, bathing the room in that rich, honeyed light that makes every shadow look deeper. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. There was only one name I needed to call. Mr. Baird picked up on the second ring. Odalin, he said. I wondered when I'd hear from you. I didn't waste time. It's time. There was a pause. You have 5 business days to set the stage, he replied. No one suspects a thing. We ended the call without further pleasantries. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I went back into the study, picked up my badge from the corner of the desk, and slipped it over my head. But this time, I didn't wear it to belong. I wore it to remind myself the girl they tried to erase was the woman holding the pen now. I didn't sleep much the night before the gala. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't excitement either. It was a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years, like when you're watching a storm come in, and for once, you're not trying to outrun it. You're just letting it come, knowing you've already boarded the windows and stocked the cellar. I arrived at the hotel just before 7. The valet greeted me politely, his eyes catching on the navy dress I'd chosen. Simple, clean lines, no sparkle. I walked in alone, past the clinking glasses and small-talk smiles, and stepped up to the welcome table. Hi, I said with a quiet ease. Odalin Cross. The young woman checking the list blinked at her tablet. Her mouth pinched slightly. Oh, we didn't have you confirmed, she said. Most people said you wouldn't be coming. That sentence sat between us like a misfired firework. She scanned the names again, then reached beneath the table and handed me a place card that read, Department Liaison. No title, no team, not even my name. I'm really sorry, she added, lowering her voice. There's a seat behind the AV column. Table 11, behind the column. I gave her a gentle nod and walked into the ballroom, my heels making no sound on the plush carpet. The chandeliers above shimmered like they were proud of their own reflection. Tables bloomed with white roses and silver menus. Callista stood near the center table, posing with 2 executives and a photographer. She wore gold. Of course she did. I found table 11. It was close enough to hear the music, but not enough to feel like I was part of anything. My place setting had been hastily added. The name card was bent, handwritten in ink that bled slightly at the edges. I didn't eat much, just picked at the salad, and nodded politely when someone tried to make small talk about quarterly forecasts. Then the lights dimmed and the stage lit up. Tonight, the MC boomed, we honor the recipient of the Leadership Legacy Award, Callista Cross. Applause thundered, camera flashes. Someone whistled. A video montage played showing highlights from major campaigns, outreach programs, brand pivots, smiling staff, boardroom moments, celebration shots. And then there it was. A photo from the project I'd led 3 years ago, the rebrand that pulled us out of a steep decline. Except I wasn't in the photo. Everyone else was. I remembered the exact moment that picture had been taken. I'd stepped out of frame to adjust the lighting on a demo board. Left for 2 minutes. And that 2 minutes erased me entirely. It wasn't accidental. It never was. I stayed seated through the speech, the applause, the clinking of glasses. I didn't clap. I didn't stand. I just watched. Not because I didn't care, but because I was studying the architecture of the illusion. They wanted the world to believe she built it all. That I had no hand in anything, but I was the one holding the blueprints. That following Monday, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. My keycard let me into the parking garage without a hitch. I rode the elevator up to the executive floor and swiped my badge at the security door. A red light blinked. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. One of the new security officers walked over. He didn't recognize me right away, then stiffened when he read my name. Looks like your clearance was updated, he said, tapping the tablet. Friday night. Of course. While I sat in a corner at the gala, eating wilted salad and watching my work get cropped out of history, they'd been digitally locking me out of the floor I helped design. I nodded once and turned away. No confrontation, no scene. I walked out of the building and crossed the street to a cafe I used to take my mother to back when she still spoke up in family meetings. Mr. Baird was already there, seated by the window, reading a newspaper like the world hadn't changed under his feet. I slid into the booth and placed a folder on the table. The cover read, Unfiled Complaints. HR. He raised an eyebrow. I've been collecting them, I said. Documentation, timelines, screenshots. He nodded slowly. Now I understand why your grandfather made me wait to tell you. I stirred my tea and watched the steam curl upward. I don't want revenge, I said finally. But I want it fixed. I want alignment, not performance. His lips curled into a dry smile. That's why you're the one he trusted. We reviewed the next steps in silence. The language for the shareholder memo, the timing, the chain of disclosure. As we wrapped up, I reached for my badge again. It still hung from my neck, still bore my name, still carried the quiet belief I once had that if you worked hard and kept your head down, you'd be seen. But belief fades, and clarity replaces it. I didn't need to be invited to the table anymore. I had my own set of keys. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Baird's office before the receptionist flipped the open sign. A dull gray hung in the sky. The kind of overcast light that doesn't tell you if it's going to rain or just linger. I didn't bring anyone with me. No entourage, no witness. Just my bag, a folder, and the silent resolve I'd sharpened over the past few nights. Mr. Baird welcomed me in with a nod. No small talk. We both knew what this morning meant. He handed me the signature page printed on thick cream paper. I already knew the section he'd highlighted. Majority voting power, activated upon maturity, per Clause 7B of the 2007 Revised Trust. I picked up the pen and signed. My hand didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I slid the document back across the desk. Don't notify them yet, I said. Let them act like nothing's changed. Baird tapped the calendar on his desk. Meeting scheduled, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. The boardroom. I nodded, stood up, and walked out without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up. The world kept moving. Pedestrians rushed by with coffee cups and gym bags, too busy to care that the balance of power inside a multi-million-dollar company had just shifted without anyone noticing. And I preferred it that way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, watching the shadows move across the ceiling like old regrets. My mind kept replaying moments I hadn't allowed myself to feel fully, until now Dad, pulling me aside after a meeting, saying, "You should let Callista lead these kinds of calls. She's more polished," or Mom brushing off my ideas with, "You've always been the quiet one." That's your strength. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, meaning only to check the time. But a new text message was sitting there waiting like a trap. Maurice, heard you've been asking questions, drop it. You're not built for this fight. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. For a split second, I felt 12 again. Awkward, overlooked scribbling notes at the end of Grandpa's desk, while everyone else talked over me. Maybe I wasn't built for this. Maybe I was nothing without Grandpa. Maybe they were right. My thumb hovered over the encrypted file I'd been building. HR violations, equity reports, incident memos from employees too scared to speak. I nearly deleted it. My finger rested on the trash icon. But before I could act, another notification appeared. Voice memo from Ellen Maines. The name made me sit up. Ellen had worked in HR for over a decade until she was quietly let go 6 months ago. She never spoke publicly, not once. I tapped play. Her voice was calm, but tired. I know what Callista did to the marketing interns. I have copies of the emails. If you need a statement, I'm ready to give one. I listened twice. That was the moment I stopped doubting. My silence hadn't been weakness. It had been storage. And now it was becoming strategy. The following day, I drove out to the west side of the city. It took me almost an hour with traffic, but I didn't mind. I needed the time to steady what was coming. Grandpa's old office sat above the garage in the guest house untouched since the memorial. I hadn't been back since the family emptied out the estate of anything valuable, leaving behind the things no one cared to claim, like his books, his notes, his words. The door creaked when I opened it. The familiar scent of cedar and old ink still lingered. Dust motes danced in the morning light spilling through the window. I ran my hand across the desk. Grandpa had carved it himself out of black walnut. I used to sit under it as a child, pretending it was a fortress. On the wall above his chair was the framed quote he used to mutter under his breath whenever things got messy in the boardroom. Respect isn't inherited. It's practiced. I pulled out the folder I'd been compiling, laid it gently on the wood. Employee testimonies, financial trails, internal reports. Everything they thought had disappeared with the interns, the assistants, the seasonal temps. I had it all. They thought I'd been quiet because I was passive. But quiet doesn't mean absent. I looked at the chair they'd put Callista in, the one they propped up with applause and shallow awards, pretending the foundation wasn't crumbling beneath her. They're going to sit across from me Tuesday? I whispered, running my fingers along the edge of the speech notes I had prepared. And they'll finally have to listen. I closed the folder and stood up taller than I felt. This time, I wouldn't interrupt or plead. This time, I'd speak last. Tuesday morning came with the kind of stillness that feels like it's holding its breath. I stood in the mirror longer than usual. Not to adjust anything, just to acknowledge myself. I wasn't dressing for them. I wasn't hoping for approval. A fitted navy blazer, clean lines hair, pinned back a leather folder under my arm, and a key in my voice they hadn't heard yet. The elevator ride up to the 21st floor was quiet. I didn't speak to the assistant who offered me a cautious glance. I didn't glance back. By the time I reached the double doors of the boardroom, they were already deep in discussion. Through the frosted glass, I heard Martin's voice. Loud, confident, theatrical. Projected Q4 growth will exceed 12% if we continue our current trajectory. I've consolidated metrics from PR and digital operations. I pushed open the doors. 12 heads turned. Martin blinked. Excuse me, Adeline, this is a closed session. Executives only. I walked in without a word, stepped to the head of the table, and placed my folder down slowly. I'm not here as staff, I said calmly. I'm here as majority shareholder. Silence broke over the room like a dropped glass. A few looked to Martin. One board member chuckled uncomfortably. Another fumbled his pen, dropping it onto the binder in front of him. I pulled the folder open and slid a copy of the notarized documentation across the table. Clause 7B of the 2007 Revised Trust. Effective upon my 30th birthday. 70% voting rights. Activated, signed, sealed. A woman to my left adjusted her glasses and began reading. Someone else whispered, "This has to be a mistake." I folded my hands in front of me. "You can dispute the emotion," I said evenly, "but you can't dispute the law." Martin tried to recover his footing. "Adeline, this is highly irregular. No one informed us of that's the point," I said, cutting through. "You weren't supposed to be informed. Yet. No shouting, no spectacle, just fact. Undeniable. Printed and signed." I let the silence linger. Let them sit in it. Then I handed out another set of folders, one for each person at the table. "These are HR complaints that never reached resolution. Project performance reports altered after review. And this," I tapped the third section, "is a comparison of raw data versus what Callista's department submitted to the press, inflated by 300%. Martin's neck flushed crimson. A soft chime echoed as I tapped the speakerphone on my phone already connected to a recording. A man's voice played through the room. Confident, dismissive. "No one cares who Adeline is. Just use her analytics and throw Callista's name on top. That's the look we need." It ended. No one spoke. "I'm not here to retaliate," I said. "I'm here to recalibrate." Martin stood. "This is a personal vendetta." I shook my head. "This is compliance." I turned to the board chair. "As per company bylaws, I'm motioning to remove Martin Fletcher from the position of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately." The chair, a man who'd known my grandfather, who'd nodded solemnly at his funeral, glanced at the documents, then at me. "With your majority stake, motion carried." Martin's jaw clenched. He looked around the table waiting for anyone to challenge it. No one did. He shoved his binder into his briefcase, muttering something under his breath, stormed out without looking back. Callista sat motionless, her lips tight, her eyes burning holes through the tabletop. She didn't speak. I didn't need her to. For the first time, I didn't flinch. For the first time, they weren't looking through me. They were looking at me. They thought I'd come back begging. I came back holding the keys. The morning after the boardroom shift, I sat at my kitchen counter, the mug in my hand, growing colder by the minute. Sleep hadn't come easy. Not because of regret, but because the silence that followed power was louder than I'd imagined. I watched the sky lighten over the backyard, pink and pale blue curling at the edges like an old photograph. Then my phone buzzed, an email notification from the Denver Ledger. Subject: Family Empire's Hidden Battle Shareholder Coup or Legacy Reckoning. I blinked. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't sent a thing. But someone had. The article was front page. It detailed the trust. The voting shift. It named me. Adeline Calder, the silent architect of reform. And it didn't hold back. There were quotes from former employees, anonymous staff. One even said if you ever worked with Adeline, you knew things were running smoothly because she was in the background keeping them steady. I scrolled lower. Screenshots from HR complaints. Discrepancies in Callista's digital campaigns. A photo of the award night Callista front and center captioned with a quiet asterisk. Project led by Adeline. Not credited. I leaned back in my chair. Someone had cracked the dam, and the water was rising. Within an hour, We Worked with Adeline started trending on Reddit. I was in marketing. We were told not to CC her, even though the numbers came from her reports. She gave me my first internship. Told me I didn't have to be loud to be valuable. I left because I couldn't watch them erase her one more time. The gratitude didn't sting. But the realization did, that I had been gone in plain sight for years, and no one had said anything until now. I was still reading when the phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I answered. She didn't say hello. "You humiliated us," she hissed. Her voice cracked like glass, sharp and disappointed. "Callista won awards. She was the face of this family." And now you drag our name through the dirt to look like a martyr? I didn't raise my voice. You taught me not to shout, I said. You just never thought I'd use silence to dismantle you. She paused. I could hear her breath hitch. Then she hung up. An hour later, a text from my father buzzed through. If your goal was to ruin your family's name, congrats. No questions, no curiosity, just the familiar tone of accusation worn like armor. They hadn't asked what was true. They hadn't asked if I was okay. They didn't want truth. They wanted control dressed as legacy. By early afternoon, I was back at the office. Walking the hallway felt different now. People looked up when I passed, not with fear, but with something close to acknowledgement. Some nodded. Others said nothing, but held eye contact longer than before. Near the break room, a young man, maybe fresh out of college, stood beside the coffee machine. He looked like he wanted to shrink into the floor. But as I passed, he stepped forward. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. I turned to him. We didn't think anyone would ever listen, especially not someone in your position. He wasn't asking for anything, just saying it out loud. I nodded. I didn't say a word, but I didn't walk away either. I stayed in that break room, poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, leaned against the counter. We stood there in silence. It wasn't awkward, it was steady. And for the first time, I realized something. Maybe power doesn't isolate you. Maybe it just reveals who was never standing with you in the first place. Tuesday morning arrived with that odd hush that falls before a storm, not loud, not panicked. Just a kind of suspended quiet, the kind that used to make me brace for something sharp. But this time, I didn't flinch. I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor. The hallway smelled faintly of cologne and cold ambition. Polished shoes clicked toward the boardroom like clockwork, unaware or pretending not to know what was about to happen. I walked in exactly at 9. The room was full. The same long walnut table, the same suits. Martin sat near the projector, flipping through charts. Callista had claimed the corner chair draped in white silk, her hair pulled back like she was attending a photo shoot instead of a reckoning. But she wasn't alone. Her lawyer sat beside her, young, smug, freshly pressed. My father leaned forward across the table, fingers steepled eyes on me like I was a child interrupting grown-up talk. I didn't sit. Callista's voice rang first. I'd like this meeting to begin with an acknowledgement, she said smoothly, sliding a file toward the center. We believe Adeline has engaged in serious abuse of trust and misappropriation of assets, specifically from grandfather's estate. Her lawyer adjusted his glasses, opening the document. If the board reviews Article 14b, you'll see the evidence of irregular authorization signed by Ms. Calder, bypassing proper channels. I waited, then turned to Mr. Baird, already seated in the corner. Calm briefcase resting neatly on his lap. He stood slowly and said with quiet finality, "That document was voided in 2014 by your father." He pulled out a single page, yellowed, stamped, and notarized. I have the revocation here, filed, legally amended, and signed. Your family may not remember it, but the law does. The silence cracked open like glass under heat. Martin stopped mid-sip of water. Callista's lips parted, but no words came. My father paled. No one spoke. I moved to my seat head of the table and placed a folder in front of me. This isn't about emotions, I said plainly. This is about stewardship. They didn't nod. They just watched, as if realizing too late that I wasn't bluffing. I'm submitting a motion I continued to formally dissolve all family-held executive positions, effective immediately, and move this company to a merit-based leadership model. The board chair, an older man who had once patted my head in the hallway, looked at me long and hard. Then he looked at the others. You have the votes, he asked softly. I slid the tally sheet forward. I do. The votes were cast and counted and done. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no tears. Maurice sat stiff, his jaw locked. Callista didn't look at me, just stared down at her perfectly manicured nails. The board chair stood, motion carried. Martin gathered his papers in silence and walked out. His back hunched, his footsteps unsteady. Callista followed, silent, ghost-like. My parents didn't say goodbye. Later that afternoon, I sat in the same boardroom. But this time, the table looked different. It wasn't the wood or the lighting. It was the people. Across from me sat analysts, software engineers, 2 HR directors, folks who'd been with the company for years but had never spoken in this room. Now, they were here. And I wasn't speaking much. I was listening. A woman in her late 40s from finance raised her hand. We've always had ideas, but we didn't think they mattered. I looked around. They do now? I said, then leaned back, letting the room breathe. Outside the window, Denver's skyline blinked gold beneath the setting sun. I could almost see Grandpa there, hands in pockets, gaze steady. And I exhaled. I hadn't just survived their plan. I'd rewritten what power looked like in this room. It's been a year. Same building, same elevator hum, same skyline brushing against the Rockies in the distance. But everything inside feels different now. Like the walls finally exhaled after years of holding their breath. The executive suite isn't carved in polished walnut anymore. We swapped it for warm oak, soft lighting, quiet tones. On one wall, we hung a sign that simply reads, "Listening first. Titles later." I walk past the new HR suite where a circle of chairs replaces the old glass desk. There's a whiteboard with questions of the week, scribbled answers in all kinds of handwriting. I hear someone laugh from the break room. Real laughter, not the tense kind that floats around when people are performing. And just like that, I realize they're not afraid anymore. That's the legacy I care about. Not statues, not plaques, but air. Breathable, honest air. My corner office has changed too. Gone are the framed degrees and magazine features. Now it holds one plant, a comfortable chair, and shelves filled with books people actually borrow. In my bottom drawer, there's an envelope I've never mailed. Cream card stock. Handwritten. Addressed to 2 people who once shared a roof and a last name with me. Inside it only says one thing. You could have had both daughters. If only you didn't need one to disappear. Some days I think about sending it, but then I remember. Silence isn't a wound for me anymore. It's a wall I built. For peace, not punishment. I keep it sealed. That silence is my boundary. Around mid-afternoon, someone knocks softly and enters holding a photo frame. It's one of the old gala pictures from the year I stepped back in. I remember that night. My name wasn't printed anywhere. My role was blurred, and in this very photo, I'm half out of frame, standing awkwardly behind Callista as she accepted an award built on work I'd done. The young employee hesitates. Should I take this down, replace it? I study the image for a beat. No, I tell her, let it stay. She blinks, surprised. It reminds me where I never want anyone else to stand again. She nods, thoughtful, then hands me a second photo. This one's from just last week. Same company, same building, but no one's cropped out. Everyone's laughing, shoulders touching. It's not a staged event, just a moment caught in motion, alive. I walk with her down the hallway and pin it right below a new plaque we installed last month. Inside the frame, my old company badge, the same one that once turned red outside the executive wing. Below it, etched into brushed steel, you never needed their permission to belong. I stand back and let the echo of that truth settle in my chest. I don't need applause for what I've done. I don't need my name written bigger or higher. Because the people who work here now, they don't have to beg for a seat. They walk in like they matter. And that's the whole point. Later that evening, before heading out, I pause in the hallway. The sun stretches long over the Denver skyline. I place my hand on the cool glass window, the same one Grandpa once leaned against watching the city grow. He didn't leave me an empire. He left me an opening, a chance to better. Final reflection plays in my head like a quiet voice I've grown into. They called me useless, but I built the table they now sit at, and I didn't build it for applause. I built it so no one else would ever have to beg for a seat.